I've said before, and I will say it again today, everybody in this room has access to the most transparent and accessible president in American history. The cabinet meeting yesterday was further proof. President Trump asked each secretary to provide an update to all of you in the media on the critical work they are doing at their respective agencies to deliver on his agenda. And according to new reporting from the Washington Times, who I believe is in this room today, President Trump answered nearly 100 questions from the press, all of you, during his first 3 open press cabinet meetings this year. That's nearly 20 times the number answered by Joe Biden in cabinet meetings during his entire 4 years in office. In more excellent economic news that was released yesterday, the Consumer Price Index report showed inflation fell to 2.4% in March, smashing expectations for the second straight month in a row. This marked the first drop in consumer prices dating all the way back to the COVID pandemic. Prescription drug prices.
You're watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. So I want to break in for a second to talk about some breaking news out of Boca Raton, Florida. So according to NBC6 in South Florida, a small plane crashed in Boca Raton Friday morning, this morning, killing the 3 people on board and leaving a man who is in a vehicle on the ground injured. That's according to officials there in Boca Raton. Now, the crash happened in the area of Military Trail and Glades Road, not far from the Boca Raton Airport and I-95. Now, according to the FAA, the plane was carrying 3 people when it went down around 10 this morning, a little after 10 this morning, after leaving from Boca Raton Airport on its way to Tallahassee International Airport. Again, I'm reading more information right now in real time from our NBC6 in South Florida. Now, Boca Raton Fire Rescue Assistant Chief Michael LaSalle said the 3 people who were on the plane were killed, and a man who was in a vehicle on the ground was injured, and he's dealing with some non-life-threatening injuries. So I just want to recap what we have so far. A small plane crash in Boca Raton Friday morning, killing 3 people on board and leaving a man who was in a vehicle on the ground injured. That's according to officials. That's what officials told NBC6 in South Florida. And this comes just a day after we dealt with a deadly helicopter crash in the Hudson River in New York City. Also, an American Airlines plane with wings that were clipped there on the tarmac. So again, a lot happening when it comes to aviation here. But again, small plane crash in Boca Raton this morning, killing 3 people on board and leaving a man who was in a vehicle on the ground injured. So yeah, we will continue to follow that story, and as soon as we get images from that scene, we will bring it to you here live on Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. But for now, we want to send it back over to the White House briefing that's taking place in Washington, D.C. This is Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt before she takes any questions from reporters.
To share with you on this Friday. On Tuesday this week, First Lady Melania Trump celebrated the advancement of the Take It Down Act in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. The important legislation passed the committee with bipartisan support, and as you may remember, the President talked about this bill in his address to a joint session of Congress last month. The First Lady remains dedicated to her championing child well-being, ensuring that every young person can thrive, and of course, championing her Be Best agenda. We urge Congress to swiftly pass this important legislation. Here in our new media seat today, we have Jordan Berman. Jordan is a social media content creator and influencer and a lawyer who grew up following breaking down the news from a neutral perspective. Jordan is the host of her own podcast called Unbiased Politics, where she dissects the top stories from the week from a legal perspective. Jordan focuses on bringing back real journalism from a nonpartisan perspective and has mastered explaining complex legal decisions to a mass audience in the short-form context. Her 2 biggest platforms are TikTok and Instagram, where she has roughly 500,000 followers on each. With that, please kick us off, Jordan.
Thank you. As you know, yesterday the House passed the SAFE Act, and many married women, soon-to-be married women, are concerned that the new voter ID requirements may inhibit their access to the polls. What assurances can you give women voters in America to ease their concerns?
Sure. Well, the SAVE Act, as you mentioned, was passed by the House yesterday. This is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. I believe I'm getting that correct. And this act is a common sense measure. It would require proof of citizenship for voting in our elections. The Democrats have been fear-mongering about this bill, have been saying that married women, if their name has changed, they didn't change it on their identification, would not be able to vote. That is complete fallacy. There are outlined in the bill about how to avoid that. The president very much supports a common sense solution to ensuring that only citizens can engage in our elections. This is critical to improving the integrity of our elections and also the trust that American citizens need to have in our electoral process. So the president supports this bill, and that is a myth that has been proven wrong by the text of this bill, and I believe some of the co-sponsors of the bill have been very vocal in addressing that. And certainly I myself, as a married woman, would not stand before this podium if the president did not support such a common sense measure.
Thank you. For my next question, I actually want to give a voice to the American people. I sourced a question from one of my listeners. Her name is Bryn. She is from Oregon. And she asked, what, if any, plans do you have, the administration, for the money that will be generated by tariffs imposed on foreign goods? How will the administration facilitate the development of American industries when many critical components, labor, parts, etc., are much cheaper and more feasible from foreign entities?
It's a great question from your listener, and I want to thank her for submitting it to you to ask. That's the part of the New Media Seat, is so that everyday Americans across the country have a voice in this room. So thank you again for being here. Thanks for the question. The president's point about his trade and tariff agenda is to bolster our manufacturing industries here in our country, to bring down the cost of living here in our country, and to ensure that we are maintaining critical supply chains here in America. We cannot be dependent on countries like China if we want this country to be strong and wealthy. So the president wants to restore wealth to America by shoring up these jobs here at home, which will result in good paying jobs and higher wages for the American public. And so Americans should trust in that process. He effectively implemented tariffs in his first term while driving down the cost of living in this country, and that's what he's focused on doing again. So thank you.
As a follow-up question, could I just ask, are there any specific ideas that the administration has as to what that revenue, specific tariff revenue, will be used for?
Yes, to the heart. Crippling national debt in the trillions that is going to bankrupt our nation for future generations. So that money coming back home will make America in the green rather than in the red, which any small business owner across the country, I believe, can appreciate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kelly.
Hey.
Tomorrow there will be negotiations between the United States and Iran in Oman. What are the president's chief goals for that, and is he satisfied with how Iran is responding to this? They don't want direct face-to-face negotiations, instead sort of old-school shuttle diplomacy where they're in separate rooms and messages are passed back and forth. So is the president comfortable with the arrangement there, and what is the chief objective?
Well, I have spoken to both the president and also his national security team who will be engaged in these discussions. These will be direct talks with the Iranians, and I want to make that very clear. I also spoke to the president just last night about his goal when it comes to Iran, and he has reiterated repeatedly to all of you publicly and also privately to his team here at the White House, his ultimate goal and the ultimate objective is to ensure that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. The president believes in diplomacy, direct talks, talking directly in the same room in order to achieve that goal, but he's made it very clear to the Iranians, and his national security team will as well, that all options are on the table, and Iran has a choice to make. You can agree to President Trump's demand, or there will be all hell to pay, and that's how the president feels. He feels very strongly about it.
And can you update us on Mr. Witkoff in Russia and what's happening with direct communications with Vladimir Putin?
I can confirm that Mr. Witkoff is in Russia to have direct communications with the Kremlin and with Vladimir Putin. This is another step in the negotiating process towards a ceasefire and an ultimate peace deal in Russia and Ukraine. As these negotiations are ongoing, I obviously will not get ahead of the president or his team, but I think the president has been quite clear that he's been continually frustrated with both sides of this conflict, and he wants wants to see this fighting end. He wants the war to end. We believe we have leverage in negotiating a deal, a peace deal, and we're going to use that leverage, and the president is determined to see this through.
Thanks, Caroline. President Trump has said China wants to make a deal on tariffs. The president says he has a great relationship with Chinese President Xi. He's willing to speak with him directly. Why doesn't the president just pick up the phone and get this ball going?
All of the things the president just said are true. The president, as I said from the podium just a few days ago when I was up here, would be gracious if China intends to make a deal with the United States. If China continues to retaliate, it's not good for China. The United States of America is the strongest, best economy in the world, as evidenced by the more than 75 countries who have called the administration immediately to cut good deals. So the president wants to do what's right for the American people. He wants to see fair trade practices around the globe, and that's his intention and his goal.
So is he waiting for China to make the first move here?
I'm not going to comment on communications that are happening or may not be happening, or either way. We'll leave it to our national security team to get these discussions underway. And as always, in the effort of transparency, we will provide updates moving forward. But the president has made it very clear he's open to a deal with China.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal? If they're not talking, where's that optimism come
He's
from?
optimistic.
Hey,
Sean.
why would any of our allies work with us to isolate China in a trade war if we're treating friend and foe alike?
You'll have to talk to our allies who are reaching out to us. The phones are ringing off of the hooks. They've made it very clear they need the United States of America. They need our markets. They need our consumer base. You saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office with the president saying that he was going to bring down all of their monetary tariffs and their non-monetary tariff trade barriers as well. We've heard from South Korea. We've heard from Japan. The president has spoken to Vietnam. We have Italy coming to the White House next week. There's a reason for that, Sean, and it's because they need the United States of America and our business model and our markets to survive, and the president is using that leverage to our advantage. Michael.
Hey, thank you, Caroline. Two-part question on China. Beijing says it will simply ignore any further tariff escalations from the U.S. Does President Trump see this as China backing down? And as a follow-up to that, what do you say to people like Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary who say, you guys simply haven't tariffed China enough?
Look, the tariff rate on China remains where it was yesterday, at the 145% level. The president made it very clear when the United States is punched, he will punch back harder, and he hopes to make a deal that benefits the American worker and our companies that have been ripped off for far too long, and he's finally taking bold and courageous action to do that. You know, taking on China is, in the terms of trade and tariffs, is something that both Democrats and Republicans alike have spoken about for decades. President Trump is finally doing it.
Caroline, real quick, the president of El Salvador is coming to the White House on Monday. Does President Trump want him to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia with him?
The Supreme Court made their ruling last night very clear that it's the administration's responsibility to facilitate the return, not to effectuate the return. I believe the Department of Justice just filed another brief in the lower court. I would defer you to that for any updates. But as you mentioned, President Bukele will be here at the White House on Monday to talk about the cooperation that is at an all-time high. And we very much appreciate President Bukele and El Salvador's cooperation and the repatriation of El Salvadorian gang members who the previous administration allowed to infiltrate our country. Sure.
Thank you very much, Caroline. The president spoke quite highly of the great relationship that he has with the Turkish president. We know that the president might be heading off to the Middle East very soon. Is he planning to meet with the Turkish president, either here in the White House or in Turkey? Any plans?
I don't have any details about the president's overseas trip other than to say he was surely going to Saudi Arabia. There could be more countries as part of that trip. We're working on the details, and as I've said repeatedly, we will provide the details of that trip as soon as possible.
A trip to Turkey, or his invitation to the Turkish president, is under consideration?
I am not going to comment on the details of the trip, but once they're confirmed, I will certainly let you all know. Yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Caroline. I'd like to ask you about presidential health and also about tariffs. On presidential health, are there plans for the president's physician to come here and take our questions? And also, President Trump repeatedly makes remarks about the former president's health. Is he considering using his executive powers to bring any greater transparency there?
As I have said, the president is undergoing his long-scheduled physical. It's a yearly physical that every president receives, and we will provide an update on that by the president's physician as soon as we possibly can.
And about the former president and transparency regarding his health. Are there...
Well, I can tell you there was certainly a lack of transparency from the former president, from the entire former administration, and frankly, a lot of people in this room when it came to the health and the competence of the former president of the United States, Joe Biden. There was one of the greatest cover-ups and frankly political scandals this nation has ever seen. It's been unraveled in some recent books that are being written by journalists who engaged in that cover-up and scandal, which is quite ironic. But this president is clearly committed to transparency. You in this room see him and hear from him on